Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. There's a word now on many people's lips, the R word, revenge, when it comes to the politics of the Trump administration. There's a new US revenge tax, apparently, designed, I guess, to punish foreigners. It's been nicknamed the revenge tax. There's certainly a revengeful quality to Donald Trump's behavior. One columnist in The Guardian describes a revenge spree on Harvard, and the retribution is endless, some of it personal, some of it ideological. In fact, one author describes, David Korn in Mother Jones, describes Trump's revenge-a-thon. So how to make sense of all this revenge in the air? My guest today has, appropriately enough, a new book out. It's called The Science of Revenge, and his name is James Kimmel Jr., and he's joining us from just outside Philadelphia. James, I don't want to make this all about Trump, because everything seems to be all about Trump these days, but it's very hard not to talk about him when we talk about revenge, isn't it?
It is difficult because, he's kind of become, revenge has become his brand in effect, and it's become the brand or the sub-brand of maybe MAGA, and it's become the sub-brand of maybe America itself right now.
Wow, I like all that stuff. So tell me a little bit more. The brand of America, revenge, explain what you mean.
This crosses political structures and political ideology. It's a human problem, and therefore it makes sense that humans in large groups can become extremely vengeful. And now we know from neuroscience that vengeance seeking very much mirrors, if doesn't completely overlap with other addictions. And the neuroscience now shows us that your brain on revenge looks like your brain on drugs. The question then becomes are we witnessing a nation or significant portions of the nation on both sides of the political divide who have become caught up in a revenge addiction moment or decade here now, that we're steadily working toward disaster with, and haven't really focused on how to reverse that?
Yeah, the subtitle of your book is Understanding the World's Deadliest Addiction and How to Overcome It. So for you, is revenge like alcohol or drugs or other kinds of addiction, fast food perhaps? I mean, is it no different from other forms of addiction?
At the neurobiological level, it doesn't look like it's very different from those other forms of addiction. It looks very similar. Some of the unique aspects of revenge versus substance use. Well, let me just talk about the primary similarity. We seek revenge to make ourselves feel better, the way that drug or alcohol users, seek out those substances to make themselves feel better.
So it's a comfort.
It's a comfort. And in particular, for revenge seeking, it's a comfort in response to a specific form of pain, which we can refer to as a grievance. And that's what activates or triggers, the revenge seeking process. So when you experience betrayal, humiliation, shame, injustice, mistreatment, any form of victimization, that activates in your brain this specific area, the pain network, that's known as the anterior insula. And your brain doesn't like pain. It doesn't want pain, and it's going to try and rebalance itself. And we've evolved over time to derive enormous pleasure from inflicting pain upon the person who wronged us in those circumstances. And brain scan neuroimaging studies show that people who have a grievance or are given a grievance, in effect, for the purposes of the study, and then given an opportunity to retaliate, what occurs is first this pain area activates, and then very soon thereafter, the reward and craving and pleasure circuitry of the mind, which is the neurocircuitry of addiction, the nucleus accumbens and dorsal striatum are these two primary areas. Those activate when we begin to think about or fantasize about punishing or seeking revenge against the person who wrongs us. And we'll derive great pleasure through dopamine release by thinking about retaliating against the person and harming them or their proxy. And the pain that we experience to trigger all this can be real or imagined. So you can imagine the pain and experience the same process. So this is partly, it's believed to be evolutionary derived as an adaptive strategy initially. But when it moves into so therefore revenge desires are normal and natural among all people around the world. But it moves into an addictive state, as other behaviors do, when you're unable to control your desire for revenge, despite knowing the negative consequences. And what that looks like neurologically is that your prefrontal cortex, your self-control and executive function circuitry are not functioning. It's either been hijacked or inhibited for some reason. And when you're unable to control it and you begin seeking this retaliatory pleasure over and over again, despite the negative consequences, that is, in effect, the classic definition of addiction. And we see that with revenge seeking.
You're obviously reducing everything down to neuroscience. You are a neuroscientist, so that kind of goes without saying. Are you suggesting then that the whole history of revenge, from the ancients, tribes, from Francis Bacon, feuds, Papua New Guinea, Japan, all that can be made sense of in the whole history of the human race by neuroscience?
Well, two things that I want to clarify. First, I'm not a neuroscientist, but my research is based on the work of more than 60 neuroscientists at universities.
Well, you're using neuroscience.
I'm actually right. I just wanted to clarify that so that your listeners don't misunderstand who they're hearing. So my training is actually as a lawyer, but I'm a lecturer in psychiatry at Yale now, and that's where I've been doing most of this research. But to answer your question, this is not a reduction of behavior to biology. It's not a reductionist argument. It's what we see is that there's a combination of things, and neurobiology helps explain part of the behavior, which is to say we can see the pathway and how that operates inside the mind. But there's enormous amounts of input from the natural environment and the social environment around you, from your family, from the community, from the larger structures of a nation, for instance, that go to feed into the input of what is a grievance and what is not, when you experience it, how you experience it, when your prefrontal cortex, that is your self-control strategy, whether that's available or not, is in part driven by how you were raised, how you were taught, what your belief systems are, whether you've been subjected to lots of oppression, discrimination, or deprivation throughout your life. All of those things are sociobiological inputs that play into this. So this isn't a biology explains the behavior exercise. It's more about biology informs how this behavior works.
But James, some societies are arranged, for better or worse, around retribution. Many pre-industrial societies are built around principles of retribution, of violence, of defense, of honor. Are you suggesting that all of that is a form of addiction?
Yes, I am suggesting that, and there's strong evidence for that. And what we're talking about there, Andrew, is we're talking about circumstances in society or built societies around entire populations being encouraged and endlessly promoted to experience shared grievances, shared forms of injustice that are peculiar to their circumstances, and to respond to those by retaliation and revenge seeking. And it's not just pre-industrial societies. This has moved on up through very industrialized societies through World War II with Germany and with Russia, America becoming that way in response, and the allies in response. And now, we're in, a revenge-seeking moment here, where there's a blind attempt by, really, the way I see it, both political spectrums, to use revenge-seeking as the way to make ourselves feel better for past grievances and past injustices, and do that with complete abandon, like a group of people who are sitting around, injecting heroin, but we don't know it. The new insight here, the astonishing insight from neuroscience, is that this is an addictive process that delivers the same types of dopamine hits, and that we do it for pleasure. But just like all forms of addiction, the high that we get is very short-lived. It doesn't last long. It leaves us feel worse, but yet wanting more in this endless cycle of revenge seeking until it's finally broken.
But there is real history, and there is real human history. When you think of revenge, Netanyahu, a few months ago, vowed, and he used the word revenge after Hamas sent the wrong body back for one of the hostages. The history of the Middle East, particularly Israel, Palestine, and the history of the Jews in Europe is, of course, all bound up in revenge. These are real, James. These are not inventions. And whether or not you think of them in addictive forms, you can't just ignore them and move on, can you?
No, it's the exact opposite. My argument in the book is that you can't ignore them, and we need to recognize it for what it is, and for the first time, be able to understand why we engage, and humans throughout history. And, in the book, I cover a large chunk of human history after the neuroscience of providing example after example, endless millions of examples of all forms of human violence. And we know now, not from the neuroscience, but this is from behavioral studies, public health data, and law enforcement data, that revenge, the desire for revenge, is the single most important, if not the single motive, for almost every form of human violence that we experience: intimate partner violence, youth violence and bullying, riots, mass shootings, street and gang violence, police brutality, violent extremism, terrorism, genocide, and war. All of those are the result of somebody somewhere feeling victimized and acting in response to that victimization to seek justice in the form of revenge. So the insight here is that we seek violence and we become perpetrators first because we see ourselves as victims. It's that sense of victimization that triggers this desire to inflict pain upon other people, either the real perpetrators who harmed us or their proxies, throughout history, in all cases.
It's interesting you talk about the personal element. When I was preparing for this show, there's a new movie called Tornado about a woman who is revengeful. In our culture, of course, the revengeful female, especially when it comes to violence against women, is often treated in heroic terms, whereas, of course, the revengeful male tends not to be. Is that fair, or is all revenge as bad as any other revenge, whether it's female revenge for male violence, male revenge for perceived female infidelity? Do you treat all kinds of revenge in the same way? Is there such a thing as rightful revenge, James?
Well, rightful revenge is what every perpetrator believes they're seeking, almost 100% of the time. I mean, even mass
No, I
killer.
take your point, but I'm asking
Yeah.
you, I understand that, but are there some forms of revenge in your mind which are better than others, or are they all as addictive and irrational as each other?
There are some forms of revenge that are, I'd rather frame it in terms of evolution. Some are adaptive, right? So let me give you an example. Um, let's say that you have a child, and every time you open the door of your house and the child walks outside, they just blindly run into the middle of the road. This is highly dangerous behavior, and you try and tell your child to not do that. They might be hit by a bus and killed, but they keep doing it. And so you're motivated quite, adaptively to prevent the loss of life of your child and to allow your own genes to continue forward into the future. To take that child aside and go, okay, we've tried the discussion method of teaching you not to do this, and that hasn't worked. So I'm going to have to inflict some pain upon you, right, to teach you not to do this. And so, that might or might not be physical pain, but more likely it might be the denial of, let's say, watching a favorite TV show or something like that, whatever it is. But the desire there by you is to help protect the life of your child and the longevity of your family. Is that good retaliation or revenge seeking for this child's continued refusal to comply with your request? Yes, it's adaptive in that case. Yes. On the other hand, if after you've done that, you go, wow, that kind of felt good to punish my child. And going forward, every minor transgression the child makes in your family, you increasingly inflict pain upon your child, and you feel good about that. And even though you try to stop it, you can't stop it. That moves then beyond what we would call adaptive revenge seeking and into pathological or addictive revenge seeking, because you keep doing it for your own gratification, and it's no longer for an adaptive purpose. So that is one, and I think, important way to distinguish between what you might call good or acceptable forms of revenge, which is a limited category, and pathological, which becomes very easily very broad and very dangerous for people.
One area of collective revenge, which I know you talk about in the book, is the idea of the death penalty. How does that fit in, James? Is that exhibit A when it comes to the addictive quality of revenge, that we collectively seem to get pleasure out of putting people to death who commit terrible crimes?
Right. And it is, I'd say, example A, but it's beyond just the administration of a death penalty by the state. Every person who commits a murderous act, kills somebody, is administering a death penalty. And they have, prior to that, all of them in unison inside their minds have completely tried, convicted, sentenced, punished, and are now carrying out that punishment. So we all have these, and I talk about this at length in the book. We all have a courtroom in our mind, and it's a very busy courtroom. It's a courtroom in which we put on trial the people who wrong us.
To jump in, James,
yeah.
A 16-year-old who shoots someone in a convenience store while robbing them doesn't necessarily or naturally have a courtroom in their mind, do they?
Yeah, I think that they do. The 16-year-old who walks into that courtroom feeling that they have a right to take the money, and the clerk denies them that right, or stands in their way, or resists their request. Okay, that teenager feels aggrieved at that moment, or threatens to call the cops, or may call the cops, or may trigger an alarm. These are all grievances in real time that are felt by that robber, the person who came in to get the money. And in their minds, when they gun down the clerk behind the counter, it's fully justified. They've instantaneously tried, convicted, sentenced, and are now punishing that person for what they believe is a real grievance and a real threat in their life. And this is going on every day, year after year.
James, you're presenting humans as entirely rational. Is there such a thing in your mind as irrationality in anything when it comes to revenge?
Well, I don't think that I'm presenting every human as rational, but I am presenting every human as acutely susceptible to feeling injustice just about anything, including imagining injustices that motivate them to go out and punish either the actual perpetrator of this injustice or their proxy. So I don't, I don't think that's the right way to describe what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we feel injustice, we feel it very fast. We feel it about the most trivial things. We feel injustices and victimization about things that maybe a million other people in the world wouldn't share as being significant. But to us, it's significant enough to retaliate. And this is going on and has been going on throughout human history. So that's the way I would explain it.
So you would reject, for example, the novels of Dostoevsky or some of the existential literature of Camus, who suggest that murders themselves, and Crime and Punishment, of course, was the core of this, that murder, which is the greatest probably of all human crimes, it can be done in an almost dispassionate way.
I'm not. No, it's very passionate.
Well, but in the way in which Dostoevsky or Camus presents murder, certainly in their literature, there is no revengeful quality. It's just something that you can do, so they choose to do it. It's a form of agency.
Well, right. Okay, so let's talk about it this way. So throughout human history, what have been the explanations for violence prior to neuroscience revealing how it actually works at a brain biological level? Right. I think throughout history, most people attribute murderous activity to somebody being a very bad person, somebody being an evil person, somebody born to do this. All of that literature, which was attempting to describe how it is that the characters in those pieces have become murderous, the authors of those did not have any access to the brain biological piece of this, but they all acknowledge, and this is from the Odyssey and the Iliad up to today, all acknowledge that it inevitably starts for the murderer with a perception of victimization. I feel that I was wronged, and they go out and kill. It is very rare in society, and it's very rare in the literature, to find people who kill for no reason. We all wait after there's a mass shooting for the police to come out and tell us what the motive is. What the motive is always, or almost in all cases, revenge seeking. What we're really looking for is what was the grievance that triggered the revenge seeking. And that's what all those books and
Yeah, I mean, in a way, your book is very radical. It requires or suggests a fundamental rereading, not just of Shakespeare and Dostoevsky and Camus, but also of the Old Testament. It's a fascinating thesis, James. What does that mean for our other emotions, though? I want to talk about forgiveness, of course, which is the reverse of revenge. But love, I mean, could you equally have written a book about the science of love? Is that another kind of addiction? I mean, the way in which you're approaching the human condition in this neuroscientific way, I mean, you say you're not a neuroscientist, but you're relying on neuroscience to make your thesis. Can we be boiled down to these things when it comes to other emotions, love, for example?
I don't know about love. I've never studied it, and I wouldn't say that it fits in this category because I don't see what we don't see is some sort of a triggering or activating event that then propels this pleasure.
But it makes us. I mean, your point, James, is that revenge makes us feel better, for better or worse.
It does, and love does as well.
And couldn't you make the same argument about love?
Sure. It's not just that revenge makes us feel better. I mean, eating food makes us feel better. Having sex makes us feel better. Eating a piece of chocolate does. There's lots of things that make us feel better. And I think where you're heading there, Andrew, is into the idea of, are there behavioral addictions? the difference between something being pleasurable and something that is addictive is this. It's the difference between being able to resist the desire for the pleasurable behavior, sex, chocolate, or revenge seeking, what have you. Being able to resist that desire despite knowing the negative consequences, or not being able to resist it despite knowing the negative consequences, is the better way to state that. That's when you have an addiction. So something that's just pleasurable for you and you act on it, like I love this person or I love this painting and I want to stare at this painting, that's not an addiction. If, on the other hand, the only thing you're ever able to do for the rest of your life is stare at this painting, and you end up starving yourself to death, you can't be productive, you have no other relationships, you may have formed an addictive relationship with that painting. And I don't know what would explain it, but that is what addiction looks like.
There may be, are there healthy forms of, I mean, acceptable mainstream forms of revenge? You remember the beginning of the movie The Godfather, when somebody comes to the Godfather and says, my daughter was raped by some boys and I want revenge. Is that I mean, whether or not you kill the boys is another thing, but is that like having one bar of chocolate or a glass of wine? Is that healthy? Can there be healthy forms of revenge? I mean, when a real, I mean, because you're not denying that there's such a thing as injustice, James. I mean, people's daughters get raped. How should someone respond to that experience?
Well, I guess a couple of things. One is that in a civilized society where we have a government arranged revenge system, a justice system that is going to do this work, in my view, that justice system ought to be more focused on preventing, once an act has occurred, is preventing a future act. And that's the difference between revenge seeking and self-defense or societal defense. So in that case, the rapist ought to be imprisoned so that he can no longer commit further rapes. On the other hand, let's just say that person who committed that rape is completely now incapable in their life of committing another rape. But this person who showed up at the Godfather's door says, I want revenge. And the Godfather hands him a gun and says, go get it. And he goes and kills that person for a rape that happened, let's say, 20 years ago. That form of revenge seeking has no benefits. It's only toxic to the person who did it, and it is harmful to society itself. And so that form of revenge seeking, being unable to resist the desire to kill that person for something that happened years ago, when there are other more useful ways of feeling better and healing yourself from the pain of that rape. And what might that be? Well, you get maybe a 5-minute or a 10-minute or an hour's worth of dopamine high from going and killing the rapist. Or you could actually imagine forgiving that rapist, and the forgiveness, we see neurobiologically, actually eliminates the pain altogether. It doesn't just cover it up for 10 minutes. It actually eliminates it. That is the structure for healing any trauma in your life. So the question for the avenger there is, do I want to be healed? In which case you can have that by using a forgiveness and addiction informed kind of treatment strategy. Or you could just go and kill the guy and get your 5 minutes of dopamine and then feel no better, for the rest of your life about what happened, because you've never forgiven and healed that wound.
The scene at the beginning of The Godfather, the guy whose daughter was raped suggests that he wouldn't get justice through the state because the police weren't taking it seriously. So it's an interesting comparison. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a kind of core utilitarianism at the heart of your argument, the science of revenge, James, that we all seek pleasure and avoid pain, so that forgiveness itself is a form of pleasure. Is that your argument? As opposed to revenge, which you seem to be arguing is an addiction and ultimately makes us unhappier. It's a kind of pain, compounding of pain. Is that the core of your argument?
No, not really at all. And that's not borne out neurologically regarding forgiveness. So what happens inside your brain when you forgive is it does the reverse of what happens when you feel an injustice. So, as I described, when you feel an injustice or sense of victimization, first it activates the pain network inside your brain. When you even simply imagine forgiving a grievance, it deactivates the pain network inside your brain. Forgiveness doesn't give you a dose of pleasure, it actually eliminates pain. It's a more permanent fix to the pain that you have because it takes the pain away. The next thing it does is it shuts down that pleasure and reward circuitry of addiction that is driving you to seek retaliation. It ends that process. It stops that cold. And the third thing it does is it restores your prefrontal cortex executive function circuitry so that you're able to make better cost benefit decisions and executive decisions for your life in order to move forward away from the pain of the past. I mean, we have to remember what we're talking about in all cases of revenge are trying to hurt someone for something they did in the past that no longer exists, Andrew, in the real world. Nobody, let's take the rapist situation in The Godfather. Nobody, if that were a real world situation and the rape had occurred at some time in the past, which it did, no one in this world can experience that ever again. Nobody can experience it with their senses. Even the victim can't experience it with their senses. It only resides in this fanciful place that we call memory, in which we keep dragging this instance and experience that happened in the past, and we
but it was in
bring
the
it into the
recent
present.
past, in The Godfather. It wasn't in the distant past. So,
it doesn't. Once it's in the past, it's in the past, and
that's all very well saying that when you're not affected. I wonder, James, whether your argument suggests a kind of almost a neuroscientific reading of the great text. So the Old Testament, I think, was very much founded on revenge. And Trump, I think, is a character out of the Old Testament. The New Testament presents Jesus Christ as a forgiving figure. Do you think in an odd kind of way, if indeed your neuroscientific argument about the science of revenge is right, that even if the ancients didn't have our scientific tools, they intuited the value of forgiveness over revenge, which explains why we got the New Testament and the narrative of the New Testament and the ideas of the New Testament as a response to the Old Testament?
Yes, very much so. What I would say is that my book presents, maybe for the first time, certainly in book form, that we now have neuroscientific evidence that supports the ancient forgiveness teachings of people like Jesus Christ and the Buddha, because it shows that forgiveness actually has very real healing properties, and we're hardwired to do it just as much as we are hardwired to seek retaliation. We choose which circuitry to activate. We can continue to focus on the revenge gratification after we've been wronged, or we can activate forgiveness and choose that. And by doing so, we can stop the pain that is motivating us to seek that revenge. And so the ancients really have now, by science, been proven correct. And forgiveness in a brain biological level looks like and acts like this sort of wonder drug or superpower that we all have, that we can activate at any time. And we also, and in fact, do activate many times in our lives. And we even do this at population levels. For instance, after World War II versus after World War I. In World War I, we went full vengeance on Germany, and that led to World War II. After World War II, we did something extraordinary, but not impossible. And the Allies decided, instead of seeking huge reparations and punishing Germany for World War II, invested enormous amounts of money in rebuilding Germany and befriending Germany. And now we've had 80 years of peace. So even at these great power levels of world scale, we have forgiveness always at work, and it's available, and it is the only way that wars actually end. You can achieve a military conquest, but until there's forgiveness between the societies, there won't be a true end to the hostilities, and the people will come back together. But when you have forgiveness at national scale, you have long-term peace.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with a lot of that, although I'm always a little suspicious of these arguments being, I wouldn't say dressed up, but dependent on science, especially neuroscience. It always seems slightly troubling that these kind of neuroscientific arguments are always used to promote a way of thinking that most of our audience would agree. But moving on, James, we've done a lot of shows on addiction. We did one recently with A.D. Jaffe, a psychologist in Los Angeles who has a new book out, Unhooked, Free Yourself from Addiction Forever. Lots of ways of dealing with addiction, alcohol, drugs, ego. Is this what we need to do with the science of revenge, given that you argue it's the world's deadliest addiction? Should we be treating it like alcohol or opioids?
Well, yes, we should. And what I would say is this: if you've enjoyed the last 5,000 plus years of human violence, and if you're a person who enjoys never stopping violence at all, and you're willing to submit to revenge seeking as the only tool that we can use, which is to say, the criminal forms of punishment, which are just the exact same motivation that the criminals in the jails had when they committed their crimes, then, you don't want to listen to what neuroscience might have said or what the ancients have taught us that happens to coincide with it. But if you're like me and you're interested in going, can we not do better? Could the medical profession, could there be a public health approach that helps people stop using violence when they feel victimized and actually heal from that victimization? Then you might be interested in the neuroscience approach, which can illuminate why we do this. And if we see this as, and I think it's well established now, as an addictive process, we can employ the already existing addiction prevention and treatment strategies to prevent and treat violence, which is an extremely hopeful thing. For the first time, we may have a public health approach that actually can reduce the level of violence in society.
I don't like to bring up the Nazi argument, James, because it's a little banal, to borrow from Hannah Arendt. But of course, she wrote the book, The Banality of Evil, about the Eichmann trial. Are there limits to your argument? I mean, in terms of your science of revenge and the nature of addiction, what would you have done at Nuremberg? How should men like Eichmann have been treated?
Well, men like those that have committed, great acts of crime are
I mean, those were in the
dangerous.
past, to use your argument. They'd happened, so there's not much you can do.
No, there's a lot you can do. So they've committed those crimes, and it's likely, since they've done it for so long, that they're going to continue doing that. And so one can imagine imprisoning those individuals for life because they're always going to present a threat to society. That is imprisonment, not for punishment. It's imprisonment for, in effect, self-defense. And I am very clear and careful in my book of distinguishing between revenge seeking for past acts and acting, including using lethal force if necessary, to prevent an imminent threat of present or future harm. Those types of individuals present or continue to present threats of future harm and need to be separated from society, of course. That's not the argument here. But if you want to prevent them from becoming who they literally became in their lives 20 and 30 and 40 years ago, then you might want to focus on revenge addiction and helping more people through public education and public health campaigns and teaching in schools and using addiction-informed strategies to help people better manage their experiences, their daily experiences of victimization, whether it's imagined because you think that the Jews have, taken over your country and betrayed your nation, or your intimate other, your spouse. It all comes down to that same experience of, I've been victimized. I now have the right to hurt or kill you. The way that works is now been explained in this book for the first time. And that's really important information.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true, James. I'm sure other people have tried to explain it. You claim to be the first, but you claim to explain evil. Finally, you talk about wonder drugs. Of course, we're all familiar with Brave New World. We've done all sorts of shows on psychedelics and the role of drugs in it, the role of good and bad drugs in our biotech age. Should or could, if there were drugs invented to address the addiction of revenge, James, as there are drugs now designed for controlling our appetite, our use of tobacco or alcohol or other illegal drugs, could you imagine a future where we have a wonder drug, probably developed in somewhere like Denmark, which will allow us all to fight the world, what you call the world's deadliest addiction? Should we be on drugs to deal with our addiction to revenge?
Only if we want a peaceful world that doesn't have violence in it, then yes. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the kind of world that I'd like to see
Wouldn't it be
and
a bit
enjoy.
boring, James? I mean,
Pardon?
wouldn't it be a bit boring?
Oh, well, not for me. I would so much rather live in a world where there isn't violence and where there's actually peace in true abundance, and violence is rare and revenge seeking is rare. And yes, in answer to your question, things like GLP-1 drugs that seem to reduce cravings of many forms might be, might be useful for this type of addictive behavior. As we said, it doesn't eliminate all forms of revenge seeking. It just eliminates the compulsive pathological forms of revenge seeking. We think we know that about 20% of all people who try drugs and alcohol, actually become addicted to it. The rest of us don't. And that's perhaps roughly equal to the number of people in a population who have, contact or repetitive contact with the criminal justice system. And so, maybe we're talking about 20% of the people doing, virtually all of the harm.
Well, it's interesting. Very, very interesting. Very provocative new book. It's already getting a lot of attention. The Science of Revenge, Understanding the World's Deadliest Addiction and How to Overcome It, by James Kimmel Jr. JD is not a neuroscientist. He's a professor, or certainly a lawyer, teaches at Yale. But he uses neuroscience to make the argument that revenge is our deadliest addiction. Fascinating stuff, James. And best of luck with the book. Congratulations on such an intriguing and controversial thesis. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on your show, Andrew. Appreciate it.